15 years of marriage, a long time, enough to know everything about a person. Or at least that's what I thought. You settle into a routine, you know where you stand, and life moves along just fine. I had my work, my responsibilities, and she had hers. It was predictable, which is the way I like it. I've never been one for surprises or sudden changes. We lived comfortably, just us and our routines. I thought that was what we both wanted. Turns out, stability isn't what everyone craves after 15 years. It all started with one of those mutual friends of hers. Some woman she knew from years back who'd come into town. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd go out, have her little outings, and I'd stay home, minding my business. But then this friend introduces her to a group of young bloggers, people my wife had no business getting tangled up with. I didn't know these kids, but I could tell just by hearing her talk about them that they were trouble. She called them modern, eco-conscious, whatever that means. To me, they just sounded like a bunch of unserious individuals with too much time on their hands. She came home talking about energy and new perspectives. I'd sit there at dinner, fork in hand, listening to her rattle on about how these people were doing something different. I had no interest in what that different was. As far as I'm concerned, different often just means messy. I like what I know, and I know what I like. I didn't see why we needed anything new or different. But I let it go. She wanted to meet up with them a few times a week. Fine. I had my TV shows, I had my quiet evenings. I figured it would blow over. But it didn't. They had some kind of hold on her. She started spending more time talking to them, messaging them, sharing their posts. Suddenly, her evenings were about the group and their little activities. I'd get home, and she'd be gone, out meeting them for some workshop or another. They weren't doing real work, as far as I could see. Real work is what pays bills, keeps food on the table, and a roof over our heads. Whatever they were doing seemed like an excuse to avoid actual responsibilities. And then she started bringing them up all the time. Over breakfast, over dinner. Oh, you should see what Michael did today, or Anna's got this great idea about reducing waste. I don't know who these people were, but I sure as hell didn't need a daily briefing on their activities. I wasn't interested, but she kept pushing. It was almost like she wanted me to be part of it, as if she needed my approval. I'm not the type to hand out approval for nonsense. I'm practical, I've got no time for fads and daydreams. Soon enough, it wasn't just talk. She started changing the way she dressed, the things she ate. There was some talk about going plant-based for environmental reasons. I'm all for eating healthy, but this felt different. She wasn't just experimenting with new recipes, it was like she was trying to become someone else. Someone who fit in with these people. And I couldn't wrap my head around why. What was so wrong with the way things were? After a while, I started noticing other things changing around the house too. Decorations disappearing, new artifacts showing up. Things that she said had positive energy or healed the spirit. It was all bullshit if you ask me. I didn't like these changes, and I let her know it. But she just smiled, said I was being too rigid, that I should open my mind. My mind's been open for 15 years, and it's kept us going just fine. I didn't need my house turning into some kind of hippie sanctuary. I've never been the kind of guy to tell someone who they can and can't see. I've always respected her independence, but this felt different. It felt like she was getting caught up in something that wasn't good for her, or for us. I tried to let it slide, tried to keep my distance and let her do her thing, but I could feel it building. This pressure, this sense that something was changing between us, and not for the better. Things started getting strange at home. It wasn't just the talk anymore, it was the house itself. Slowly, like a creeping vine, all these weird objects began filling the spaces where normal things used to be. Crystals, little bowls filled with herbs, incense sticks, and, of course, those damn candles. Everywhere I turned, there was another candle. She said it was for positive energy or some other nonsense. To me, it just smelled like a head shop and looked like a fire hazard waiting to happen. I couldn't stand the clutter, but it was happening bit by bit, sneaking in under my nose. Then came the weekend when she decided we needed to refresh the energy of the place. She told me we should rearrange the entire living room. Now, I'm not a fan of change, especially when it comes to my space. The living room was fine as it was, comfortable and functional. But she insisted. She said it was all about making the space feel open and harmonious. I don't know what was wrong with the old arrangement, it worked just fine. But I agreed, just to keep the peace. Sometimes it's easier to go along with it, you know? What really pissed me off, though, was the lack of help. She had her little group of friends over, the same ones who filled her head with all this nonsense, but they didn't lift a damn finger. They were all sitting around, chatting, drinking their herbal teas, and watching while I moved the heavy stuff. I'm not exactly a spring chicken anymore, but I'm not about to let some kids see me struggle, either. So, I did it all, moved the couch, the bookshelves, the TV stand, while they sat there acting like it was some kind of show. My own house, and I felt like I was the hired help. She kept telling me where to put things, and every time I'd move a piece of furniture, she'd change her mind. A little to the left, she'd say, or maybe it'd be better by the window. It was driving me up the wall. I'm a patient guy most of the time, but there's only so much of that I can take. I bit my tongue, though, because what was the point of arguing? It'd just end in a fight, and I didn't have the energy for that. Not after dragging half the damn house across the floor. When it was finally done, she was all smiles, acting like we'd accomplished something great. Meanwhile, I'm standing there, covered in sweat, back aching, looking around at a living room that felt less like my home and more like some kind of New Age store. Crystals on the shelves, candles in every corner, and all sorts of random stuff that didn't belong. I didn't like it. It didn't feel like my space anymore. It felt like I was living in someone else's idea of what our home should be. After that, I started noticing more changes creeping in. Little things, like the pictures on the walls being replaced with vision boards or mandalas. Stuff that made no sense to me. She even took down the old clock I liked, said it was blocking the energy flow. I don't know what kind of energy she was talking about, but I needed that damn clock to know what time it was. I didn't say anything, though. I just let it go. What was the point in fighting over a clock? The worst part was that it felt like she was trying to change everything that made our house a home. The things we'd picked out together, the memories we'd made over the years, all being pushed aside for these new things that had nothing to do with us. It was like she was trying to reinvent our lives, and I was just supposed to go along with it. I'm not the kind of guy who adapts easily to change, especially not when it feels forced. But I kept my mouth shut. I figured maybe it was just a phase, something she'd get over eventually. One evening, out of nowhere, she announces that she's done with underwear. Just like that. She says it's some kind of statement about personal freedom, that wearing it is oppressive or unnatural or whatever new nonsense she's picked up from her friends. I almost choked on my coffee when she said it. It's one thing to fill the house with crystals and incense, but now she's talking about walking around without underwear? I'm not some caveman, but this felt like too much. I didn't even know how to respond at first, it just seemed so absurd. I tried to keep calm, asked her what she meant by freedom and how underwear had anything to do with that. She just gave me that look, the one that says I don't get it and I'm stuck in my old-fashioned ways. Maybe I am, but I don't see what's so oppressive about a pair of damn underwear. It's just a part of getting dressed, part of being decent. But she was serious. She said it made her feel restricted and that she wanted to embrace a more natural way of living. I told her that this natural idea sounded more like something cooked up in one of her friends' meetings than something she'd thought through herself. We argued about it for a while, not shouting, but definitely not a calm discussion either. I was trying to understand where she was coming from, but honestly, it just felt ridiculous to me. I told her, look, I don't care what you do when you're at home, but when you're out in public, there are certain standards. It's not just about you, it's about how people perceive us as a couple, about having some respect for the way we present ourselves. She rolled her eyes at that, said I was more worried about what people think than about her comfort. Maybe she's right, but I still think there's a line that shouldn't be crossed. I tried to compromise, and after a lot of back and forth, we finally came to an agreement. She'd do what she wanted at home, fine, no underwear if that's what she wanted. But if we were going out, she'd wear it. I didn't think that was too much to ask. It's just a basic level of decency. I told her I didn't want to be out somewhere, seeing people staring or wondering what kind of lifestyle we were living. She sighed, said I was limitless in my concern for what others thought. I'm just trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, but apparently that's a bad thing now. It wasn't even about control for me, I don't care about telling her what to do. It was about keeping things in line with the values we've always shared. Or at least, the values I thought we shared. We've built a life together based on mutual respect and understanding, and suddenly, she's throwing all of that out the window for what? To feel free without underwear? It felt like every day she was trying to push further and further away from the life we had. I was just trying to hold on to something that still made sense to me. Even after we came to that agreement, it felt strained. She'd get dressed to go out, and I'd catch myself wondering if she was keeping her end of the deal. It's a terrible feeling, not trusting something as simple as that. I never used to have to think about these things. It used to be that we were on the same page, without even needing to say anything. Now it felt like every little thing was a negotiation, and I hated that feeling. I'm not a guy who needs a lot, I just need some consistency, some respect for the things that make us who we are. She seemed to think it was all just me being controlling or not wanting her to express herself. That wasn't it at all. I just didn't understand why this even had to be a thing. What happened to just being normal? Why did everything have to become some kind of statement or journey for whatever the hell they call it? I don't need a journey. I need my wife, the one who used to care about the same things I did, who didn't need to make everything into a battle about freedom or expression. I'm not against change, but not when it comes at the cost of everything we've built together. In the end, I let it go, at least, I let go of the fight. We had our compromise, and that was that. But it wasn't the same. I felt like I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next thing she'd decide needed to change. And that feeling, of not knowing what might come next, of wondering if I was going to have to argue over something as basic as underwear again, it wore me down. I didn't know how to reach her anymore, and every time we fought about this kind of thing, it just made me feel more disconnected from her, from the woman I'd known for 15 years. It started getting under my skin, these so-called friends of hers. I called them the wannabe bloggers, because that's all they seemed to do, talk about content, about likes, about views. But from where I was sitting, none of them seemed to have a real job or contribute anything meaningful. They just showed up at our place, lounged around, and acted like they owned the place. They were always there, it felt like, sipping their herbal tea, spreading out their crystals, and talking in circles about things that didn't matter. It wasn't my idea of good company, that's for sure. I tried to ignore them at first. I figured it was just a phase, that they'd lose interest eventually. But they didn't. Every week, they were in my living room, sprawled across my furniture, talking about vibes and energies. I'd come home from a long day at work, tired, wanting nothing more than to relax, and there they'd be, like they had nothing better to do. I couldn't understand it. Didn't these people have their own homes? Didn't they have lives to get back to? It felt like I was coming home to a circus, and I wasn't even sure who half of these people were. One evening, I'd had enough. I asked her, as politely as I could, why they needed to be here all the time. Couldn't they meet somewhere else? Maybe one of their places, or even a coffee shop. I wasn't trying to be a jerk about it, but it was my home too, and I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own house. She looked at me like I'd just kicked a puppy. Said I was being unsupportive, that they were her friends, and she needed this connection. I tried to explain my side, but she was already upset, her eyes getting that hurt look that made it impossible to keep arguing. She told me that I just didn't get it, that they made her feel understood in a way that I apparently didn't anymore. That stung, I'm not going to lie. But I still didn't think it was right for them to be here all the time. It wasn't about me not supporting her, it was about having some space, some time to ourselves. But she couldn't see it that way. To her, I was just being difficult, standing in the way of her growth or whatever she was calling it. It felt like I was fighting a losing battle. So, I decided to let it go. Fine, let them come over. Let them sit on my couch and light their candles and pretend they were doing something important. As long as they left me alone, I'd keep my mouth shut. I figured if it made her happy, then maybe it was worth the annoyance. I'd come home, nod at whoever was in the living room, and head straight for the bedroom or the garage, anywhere I could get some peace and quiet. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than fighting all the time. But it still grated on me. I'd hear them laughing or chanting or whatever it was they were doing, and it made me feel like an outsider in my own house. I'd never been the kind of guy who needed a lot of people around. I liked it when it was just the two of us, when we could sit together in the evening without a bunch of strangers filling up the space. Now, it felt like those days were gone. She was happy with her friends, and I was just trying to get by without causing another argument. Every now and then, I'd catch her looking at me like she was disappointed. Maybe she wanted me to join in, to embrace whatever this was that she was so into. But that wasn't me. I wasn't going to sit around talking about the power of intention or whatever buzzword they were throwing around that week. I had my own ways of dealing with things, my own beliefs. I wasn't interested in changing that just to fit in with her new crowd. So, I kept my distance and let her do her thing, even if it meant feeling like we were living separate lives. One evening, it all came to a head. They were over again, her little group of wannabe influencers, lounging around the living room like they always did. This time, they had wine, a lot of it. I could hear them laughing, their voices getting louder and more careless as the night wore on. I stayed in the other room, trying to ignore it, trying to keep my head down. I knew better than to get involved when they were in one of their moods, but I couldn't help feeling a growing irritation with every passing hour. It was my house, and it felt like I was the one who didn't belong. Then it happened. I heard a loud crash, followed by a commotion, people scrambling, someone shouting. I got up and walked into the living room, and that's when I saw it. One of them, drunk out of his mind, had knocked over one of those damn candles my wife had scattered all over the place. The candle had fallen right onto the rug, and before anyone had a chance to react, the flames were spreading. It wasn't just a small fire, the thing was growing fast, eating up the edge of the carpet. They were all just standing there, stunned, as if they had no idea what to do. I couldn't believe it. Here they were, supposedly enlightened, supposedly full of all this energy and positivity, and they couldn't even manage to put out a damn fire. I rushed over, grabbed a blanket, and started beating at the flames. It took me a few minutes, but I finally got it under control. By the time it was out, a good half of the rug was gone, charred and smoking. The room stank of burned fabric, and there was ash everywhere. I looked around at them, and they were just staring, wide-eyed, like a bunch of kids caught doing something they knew was wrong. That was it for me. I'd had enough. I stood up, looked at every single one of them, and told them to get the hell out of my house. No more nice guy, no more putting up with their nonsense just to keep the peace. I was done. I told them to take their candles, their crystals, their bullshit, and get out. They all looked at my wife, waiting for her to say something, but she just stood there, silent. She knew I was serious this time, she could see it in my face. I wasn't about to let these people burn down the home I had worked so hard to build. One of them tried to say something, some half-hearted apology, but I wasn't having it. I pointed to the door and told them to leave before I threw them out myself. Slowly, they started gathering their things, shuffling out one by one. My wife looked at me, her eyes full of anger and hurt, but I didn't care. Not this time. I wasn't going to back down. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let them do it again. This was my house, and I wasn't going to let anyone turn it into some kind of reckless playground. After they were gone, my wife and I stood there in the wreckage of our living room. The burned carpet, the spilled wine, the smell of smoke hanging in the air. She started to say something, but I cut her off. I told her I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't interested in excuses or explanations. I'd put up with a lot, more than I should have, but this was too much. I wasn't going to let these people ruin what I had built. I told her that if she wanted to keep seeing them, she could do it somewhere else, but they weren't welcome in our home anymore. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like I was some stranger who had suddenly taken her husband's place. Maybe I had changed. Maybe all of this had pushed me to a point where I couldn't be the easygoing guy I used to be. But I didn't care. I was tired of feeling like I was losing control of my own life, tired of feeling like my home wasn't my own anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for standing my ground. Not this time. Not after everything I'd put up with. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, and I just stood there, staring at the mess. I felt a mix of anger and relief, anger at what had happened, at how far things had gone, but also relief that, for once, I had taken a stand. I knew she was upset, knew this was going to be another wedge between us, but I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I wasn't going to let our home, the place I had worked so hard to create, become a casualty of whatever journey she was on. Not if I had anything to say about it. After that night, something shifted between us. She became more distant, more secretive. It wasn't that she was hiding outright, but it felt like there was a wall between us that hadn't been there before. She started going out more often, spending her evenings away. When I'd ask her where she was going, she'd just say she was meeting her friends, and that was that. No more details, no more explanations. I knew she was still seeing that group of hers, but now they weren't coming to the house. They'd found some studio, she said, a place where they could do their practices without anyone telling them to leave. Fine by me, I thought. At least it meant they weren't cluttering up my living room anymore. But it still didn't sit right with me. The way she'd leave, almost sneaking out sometimes, like she didn't want me to ask questions. It wasn't like before, when she'd tell me about her day, about what she was up to. Now, it felt like she was keeping a whole part of her life separate from me, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being shut out. It was frustrating, but I didn't know how to bring it up without starting another fight. The last thing I wanted was to push her further away, so I kept quiet, let her do her thing, even though it gnawed at me. One night, she was getting ready to go out again, and I decided to make a joke of it. I asked her if maybe I could tag along, join in on whatever it was they were doing. I said it with a smirk, trying to lighten the mood, half expecting her to laugh it off. But she didn't laugh. She turned to me, her face serious, and told me no, flat out. She said it wasn't for me, that this was her space, her time, and that I wouldn't understand. The way she said it, so dismissive, it caught me off guard. It wasn't just a no, it was a rejection, a clear message that I wasn't welcome in that part of her life. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. It wasn't like I really wanted to go, I didn't care about their weird practices or whatever they were doing. But hearing her shut me down like that, it stung more than I expected. It felt like she was drawing a line between us, making it clear that there were parts of her life that were off limits to me. I tried to play it off, shrugged, and said, well, fine then. Have it your way. But inside, I was boiling. It was like she was making it clear that I didn't belong, that I couldn't even joke about being part of her new world. After she left, I sat there, staring at the empty living room. It used to be our space, a place where we'd relax together, watch TV, just be. Now it felt like a reminder of everything that was changing between us. I thought about all the things she used to share with me, all the little details of her day, the way she used to care about what I thought. Now, it felt like she was slipping away, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. I tried to tell myself that it was just a phase, that she'd come back around eventually, but it was hard to believe that when every action seemed to push me further out of her life. I knew I could confront her, demand answers, try to force her to let me in, but I also knew that would only make things worse. She'd made it clear that this was her thing, her space, and that I wasn't welcome. So, I decided to let it go. To hell with it, I thought. If she wanted to keep her secrets, if she wanted to have this part of her life that didn't include me, then so be it. I wasn't going to beg for a place in her world. I'd done enough of that already, and I was tired of feeling like I was always the one trying to hold us together. Still, it wasn't easy. Every time she left, I felt that familiar frustration building up inside me, the sense that I was losing her bit by bit. I tried to focus on my own things, tried to keep busy, but it was hard when every evening felt emptier than the last. I missed her, missed the way things used to be, but I couldn't see a way back to that. She was on her own path now, and I was just trying to keep up, trying not to get left behind entirely. The worst part was the silence. When she'd come back, we'd talk, but it was all surface-level stuff, nothing real, nothing deep. I'd ask how her night was, and she'd say it was fine, and that'd be the end of it. No details, no stories, just a wall between us that kept getting higher. I knew I couldn't force her to open up, couldn't make her share what she didn't want to. But it hurt, knowing that there was this whole part of her life that I wasn't a part of, that she didn't even want me to understand. And I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would eventually pull us apart for good. It started as a mild irritation, something I didn't think much of at first. Just a bit of discomfort, something that seemed like it would go away on its own. But it didn't. Days turned into weeks, and the irritation turned into something more, an itch, a burning sensation that wasn't going away. It was strange. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never had anything like this before. I'm not the type to run to the doctor over every little thing, but this felt different. It was starting to worry me. I'd always been healthy, never had any issues down there, and now, out of the blue, this? At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured it was probably just some irritation, maybe from a new soap or something I'd eaten. I started being more careful, changed the soap, cut out anything that might be causing a reaction. But nothing worked. The discomfort only got worse, and soon it was impossible to ignore. It was affecting my mood, making me irritable, and I couldn't help but feel like something was off. I finally decided to see a doctor, hoping they'd be able to tell me what was going on. The doctor did the usual checkup, asked a lot of questions, and eventually prescribed some cream. He said it was probably just a mild infection, something that could happen to anyone. I took the prescription, used the cream, and waited for things to get better. But even as I followed his instructions, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that there was more to it. I'd never had anything like this before, and the timing felt strange. I kept thinking about everything that had been happening lately, all the changes with my wife, all the secrecy. It was hard not to connect the dots, even if I didn't want to. I tried not to let my mind go there, but the thought kept creeping in. What if this wasn't just a random infection? What if it had something to do with her? I knew she'd been spending a lot of time with her new friends, going to that studio, doing who knows what. And I knew she'd been distant, keeping things from me. It was impossible not to wonder if maybe there was more going on than she was letting on. The thought made me sick, made me angry, but I couldn't shake it. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that she could do something like that, but the suspicion was there, growing in the back of my mind. I started watching her more closely, trying to pick up on any signs that might tell me what was really going on. She'd come home late, smelling of wine, her hair a little messy, her clothes a bit wrinkled. I'd ask her how her night was, and she'd just say it was fine, that they'd been working on some new project. But there was something in the way she said it, something that didn't sit right with me. I'd catch her avoiding my eyes, changing the subject quickly, and it only made my suspicions grow stronger. I hated feeling like this, hated the idea that I couldn't trust her, but the evidence was piling up. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, not without proof, not without knowing for sure. But the symptoms weren't going away, and neither was the feeling that something was wrong. I kept using the cream, kept hoping it would just clear up and I could put all of this behind me. But every time I felt the discomfort, every time I looked at her and saw that guarded look in her eyes, I felt that anger bubbling up again. It was like there was a wall between us, one that had never been there before, and I couldn't break through it no matter how hard I tried. I thought about confronting her, about asking her outright if there was someone else, if she was seeing someone behind my back. But every time I thought about it, I stopped myself. What if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head, and I ended up pushing her even further away? I didn't want to lose her, didn't want to ruin what we had over some suspicion that might not even be true. But at the same time, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, the symptoms, the feeling that something was very, very wrong. So I kept it to myself, for the time being. I focused on the treatment, did everything the doctor said, and tried to act like nothing had changed. But inside, I was seething. I felt betrayed, even if I didn't have proof, even if she hadn't actually done anything. The suspicion alone was enough to eat away at me, to make me question everything about our relationship. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this, pretending that everything was normal when it felt like my entire world was starting to unravel. After that night, I couldn't let it go. The anger, the sense of betrayal, it was eating me alive. Every time I looked at her, I saw the lies, the secrets she was keeping from me. I saw the leopard print underwear in her bag, the smug look of someone who thought they could get away with anything. I needed to do something. I needed to feel like I was in control, like I wasn't just sitting back and letting her make a fool of me. I'd had enough of being the one who always stayed quiet, always let things slide. This time, I wasn't going to be that guy. She was out again, doing whatever it was she did now, and I was left alone in the house with my thoughts. I started going through her phone, looking at the contacts, the messages. I wasn't proud of it, but I didn't care anymore. I needed answers, and if she wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. I found their numbers, all of them, the whole group. The people she'd spent so much time with, the people who had taken her away from me. I copied them down, every single one. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew I'd think of something. That's when the idea hit me. It was petty, it was cruel, but it was exactly what I needed. I was tired of playing the nice guy, tired of being the one who always tried to understand, who always forgave. I went out and bought one of those over-the-counter HIV test kits. I knew it was wrong, knew it was twisted, but I didn't care. This was about getting back at her, about making her feel even a fraction of the humiliation and pain she'd put me through. I faked the test, made it look positive, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. But instead of going through with it, I stopped myself. I knew deep down that this wasn't the answer, that this would only make things worse. Instead, I started preparing the paperwork for a divorce. It was a slow, deliberate process. I didn't tell her, didn't give her any hint of what I was planning. I just needed to feel like I was taking some kind of action, like I was taking back control of my life. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about moving on, about putting an end to the chaos and the pain. I took a picture of the fake test, the 2 red lines that signified positive. It was so easy, almost too easy. I opened up my phone, pulled up the numbers I'd copied, and started sending it out, one by one, to every single one of her friends. I attached a message, something short and to the point: you might want to get yourselves checked. Looks like she's been trying to share more than just her energy. It was nasty, it was vindictive, and it felt good. I wanted them to know, wanted them to feel the same sense of panic and fear that I'd felt when I realized what she might have done to me. I sent the messages and sat back, waiting for the fallout. It didn't take long. My phone started buzzing almost immediately, messages, calls, people demanding to know what was going on. I ignored them, letting the notifications pile up, a twisted sense of satisfaction growing with each one. I imagined the chaos it must have caused, the fear and confusion among her friends. They deserved it, every single one of them. They'd been part of this, part of whatever she'd been doing behind my back, and now they could deal with the consequences. It was a twisted victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I'd been the one hurt, the one betrayed, and now she was the one scrambling to fix the mess. Just a cold sense of satisfaction. She'd made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. It was harsh, but it was the truth. I wasn't going to be the one who got walked all over anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what I'd done. Part of me knew it was wrong, knew that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But another part of me didn't care. She'd pushed me to this point, she'd made me feel like I had no other choice. And maybe this was just who we'd become now, two people who hurt each other, who couldn't find their way back to what they once had. I didn't know if there was any fixing it, any coming back from what we'd done to each other. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life again, even if it was in the worst way possible. She came back home in tears, her face flushed, her eyes red and swollen. She was in a full-blown panic, yelling at me as soon as she walked through the door. She was hysterical, accusing me of ruining her life, screaming that her friends had all cut her off, that they were terrified they might have been exposed to HIV because of what I did. She said they were even talking about going to the police, about pressing charges against her for trying to infect them deliberately. Her words came out in a jumble, almost too fast to understand, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to her unravel in front of me, her entire world falling apart. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way her voice cracked as she pleaded with me, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. I had done what I had done, and now she was facing the consequences. She kept trying to convince me that she hadn't done anything wrong, that she didn't have anything, that it was all a lie. But I didn't care. I was beyond caring at this point. All I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the months of watching her drift away, of knowing that something was wrong but being unable to stop it. This was her mess, and she would have to clean it up herself. She begged me to fix it, to tell them it was all a mistake, that none of it was true. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to bail her out, not after everything she had put me through. She wanted to live her life without consequences, to make her choices and never have to face the fallout. Well, now she was facing it, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to help her. She had pushed me to my breaking point, and I was done. There was no more trying to save our marriage, no more pretending that we could somehow make it work. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. I told her, flat out, that I wanted her out of the house. I didn't yell, didn't lose my temper. I just said it as calmly as I could, and I could see the shock on her face. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she started crying again, louder this time, her voice breaking as she begged me not to do this. But I was done. I wasn't going to listen to her lies anymore, wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her tears. I wanted her gone. I needed her gone. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let her destroy it any more than she already had. She tried to argue, tried to tell me that she had nowhere to go, that she couldn't just leave. But I didn't care. I told her to pack her things and get out. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. I watched as she stumbled around the house, grabbing her things, her sobs echoing through the empty rooms. It should have hurt to watch her like that, to see her so broken, but it didn't. All I felt was a sense of relief, like a weight was finally being lifted off my shoulders. This was the end, and it was what I needed. What we both needed, even if she couldn't see it yet. As she packed, she kept trying to talk to me, kept trying to explain, to make me understand. But I wasn't listening. I had heard enough, and there was nothing she could say that would change my mind. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. I had given her everything I had, every chance to make things right, and she had thrown it all away. This was the consequence of her actions, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her any longer. I was done being the one who always forgave, who always tried to make things work. It was time for me to move on, to take back my life. When she finally left, the house felt different. Quieter, emptier, but also lighter. I stood in the doorway, watching as she walked away, her bags in hand, her shoulders slumped. It was over. 15 years of marriage, gone in an instant. And yet, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the constant feeling that I wasn't enough. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. I was choosing to let go, to move on, to leave behind the pain and the betrayal and start over. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the silence almost deafening. I thought about everything that had happened, everything we had been through, and I knew that this was the right decision. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. We had both changed too much, hurt each other too deeply. It was time to close this chapter and start a new one, on my own. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be days when I would question myself, when I would wonder if I had made the right choice. But deep down, I knew that this was the only way forward. For both of us. I thought it was over. I thought she was gone, that the chaos was behind me, and that I could finally get back to some sense of normalcy. But it seems I underestimated just how desperate she was to prove herself to her friends. Somehow, she must have managed to convince them that everything that happened, the fake HIV test, the drama, the accusations, it was all just a joke, some elaborate prank. And then, as if to make sure I knew I hadn't won, they showed up at my house. Her entire little group of wannabe bloggers, the same people who had turned my life upside down, who had pulled her away from me. They came right to my door, like they owned the place. I heard them before I saw them, loud, obnoxious, laughing, like they were at some kind of party. I walked into the living room, and there they were, sitting around like they belonged there. They had their candles, their crystals, and they were doing one of their ridiculous sessions, right in my house. It was like they wanted to make a point, to show me that I couldn't get rid of them that easily. The arrogance of it all was almost laughable. As I walked in, they all turned to look at me, and I could see the smugness in their eyes. They thought they had won, that they were somehow above me. One of them, some guy I didn't even recognize, looked me dead in the eye and flipped me off. And then another one did it, and then another. Before I knew it, they were all sitting there, giving me the middle finger, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. I just stood there, staring at them, and then something strange happened. I started to laugh. Not a little chuckle, but a real, full-bellied laugh. They thought they could humiliate me, thought they could come into my home and make me feel small. But the whole thing was so absurd, so ridiculous, that I couldn't help but find it funny. I was laughing at them, at the stupidity of it all. They seemed confused at first, like they didn't know what to make of my reaction. They had come here expecting me to lose my temper, to yell, to maybe even throw them out. But instead, I just laughed. I could see the confusion on their faces, the way their smiles started to falter. They weren't getting the reaction they wanted, and it was throwing them off. I just shook my head, turned around, and walked out of the room. I could hear them behind me, still laughing, still trying to keep up the act, but there was a nervousness to it now, a sense that maybe they hadn't thought this through. I went to the back room, opened the closet, and there it was, my old shotgun. I hadn't touched it in years, hadn't even thought about it. But at that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. I picked it up, checked that it was unloaded, and walked back into the living room. The moment they saw me, the laughter stopped. Every single one of them went dead silent, their eyes wide, their faces pale. They had come here thinking they could push me around, thinking they could make a joke out of me. But now, they were the ones who looked scared. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just walked over to where they were sitting, and they started scrambling, tripping over each other as they tried to get away. One of them, the guy who had flipped me off first, was still sitting there, frozen. I walked up to him, and without a second thought, I swung the shotgun, the butt connecting with his shoulder. He let out a yelp, falling to the floor, and the rest of them were already halfway out the door, stumbling over each other in their rush to get away. The guy on the floor started crawling, trying to get away from me, his eyes wide with fear. I watched as they all ran, as they fled from my house like the cowards they were. The guy I had hit managed to get to his feet, limping as he made his way out the door. I followed them to the doorway, watched as they piled into their cars, still looking back at me like I was some kind of monster. And maybe I was. Maybe this was what I had become, a man pushed to his limit, a man who had nothing left to lose. I didn't care anymore. I was done being their punching bag, done letting them think they could walk all over me without any consequences. When they were gone, I stood there for a moment, the shotgun still in my hands. The house was quiet again, the silence almost deafening after all the noise. I looked around the living room, at the candles they had left behind, the mess they had made. It was over. They wouldn't be coming back. I knew that much. They had seen what I was capable of, and they wouldn't dare try to pull something like this again. I had made my point, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life again. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't something I was proud of, but it was something. After that last encounter, there was no turning back. I made sure the divorce papers went through, and I wasn't going to let her take anything from me that I didn't want her to have. I fought for everything, the house, the car, the savings. She had already taken enough from me, my peace of mind, my trust, and I wasn't about to let her take anything else. The divorce proceedings were brutal, but I stayed focused. I had nothing left to lose, and I was determined to come out of it with as much as I could. In the end, I got almost everything. The judge saw through her lies, and I walked away with the house, the car, and the majority of what we had built together. She tried to fight it, of course. She cried in court, tried to paint herself as the victim, but it didn't work. I had the evidence, the proof of everything she had done, and I wasn't afraid to use it. Her friends, the same people who had been so quick to back her up, had abandoned her as soon as things got tough. They weren't there to support her, not in court, not anywhere. She was alone, and I think that realization hit her harder than anything else. She had built her life around those people, around the lies and the games, and now it had all fallen apart. Once the divorce was finalized, she started reaching out to me again. At first, it was just messages, short, apologetic, asking if we could talk. I ignored them. I had nothing to say to her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But she didn't stop. She showed up at the house one night, standing on the porch, tears streaming down her face. She begged me to let her in, to talk, to try and work things out. She said she had made a mistake, that she was sorry, that she wanted to come back. I just stood there, looking at her, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. She told me that her friends had turned on her, that they didn't want anything to do with her anymore. She was alone, she said, and she needed me. But it was too late for that. I had given her everything I had, and she had thrown it away. There was no going back, no fixing what she had broken. I told her as much, told her that she needed to leave, that there was nothing left for her here. She cried, begged, said she would do anything to make it right. But I was done. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let her drag me back into the chaos. I watched her walk away that night, her shoulders slumped, her sobs echoing in the cold night air. It should have hurt, should have made me feel something, but it didn't. I felt a sense of finality, of closure. This was the end, and I was ready for it. I had spent too long trying to make things work, trying to hold onto something that was already gone. Now, I was free. Free to live my life without her, without the lies, without the constant sense of betrayal. I had lost enough, and I wasn't about to lose anything more. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. The house was mine, and I made it my own again. I got rid of all the things that reminded me of her, of the life we had once shared. It was therapeutic, a way to cleanse myself of everything that had happened. I painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, made it into a place that felt like mine again. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days when the memories crept in, but it was better. It was a start. People always say that time heals all wounds, and maybe that's true. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened, if I'll ever be able to trust someone like that again. But I do know that I'm better off now. I'm stronger, more resilient. I know what I want, and what I won't tolerate. I won't let anyone take advantage of me like that again. She had her chance, and she blew it. Now, it's my turn to live my life, on my terms, without the weight of her lies holding me back. She still tries to reach out every now and then. A message here, a call there. I don't respond. There's nothing left to say. She's a part of my past, a chapter that's closed. I've moved on, and I'm not looking back. I've learned to be okay with being alone, to find peace in my own company. I don't need her, or anyone else, to make me feel whole. I'm done with the drama, the games, the betrayals. I'm ready to start fresh, to build a life that's mine, free from the shadows of what once was.